Let's dive into something I know a lot of us data engineers think about a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Snowflake query optimization.
Absolutely.
You've written your SQL. It's beautiful, it's elegant, it's correct,
Right.
but it's slow.
Ugh.
And in Snowflake's world,
Yeah.
slow equals expensive.
It does.
So today we are going deep on John Ryan's
Rebecca,
optimized Snowflake query speed.
top 10 tips. You'll definitely want to check out the full article. We're just pulling out some of the really good stuff for you.
Awesome.
And just a heads up, John also has this fantastic new on-demand training course on Snowflake, Mastering Snowflake, Fundamentals, Insights, and Best Practices if you want to really, become a Snowflake guru.
Nice.
You can find it over at analytics.today.
Cool.
But for now, let's get into those optimization tips.
Sounds good.
So one thing that I think is often overlooked is how different tuning is in Snowflake compared to like your classic on-premise database. Oh, totally. You're not dealing with fixed costs anymore. So every optimization you make is going to have a direct impact on your bottom line.
It's all about speed translating into savings.
Exactly.
Which makes some of these tips from John Ryan even more mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Like I've been using Limit for ages to just, preview data.
Right.
But he points out that it can be like a performance game changer.
Oh, yeah.
Even for complex queries.
Absolutely. He actually gives this example where using top 10 with an order by way made a query 12 times faster.
Wow.
Think about applying that kind of speed boost to your own work.
That's incredible. Yeah, it's so easy to implement.
Right.
It's making me wonder what other simple tricks I've been missing out on.
For sure.
Speaking of which, he goes all in on the whole select star debate.
Oh, the select star. Yeah. And it all comes back to Snowflake's columnar storage, right? When you use select star, you're basically telling Snowflake, hey, go grab everything, even if I only need like a tiny little bit.
Right.
Which is not efficient.
So it's not just about the data itself.
Yeah.
It's how much gets moved around.
Yeah.
And even how caching is affected.
For sure.
I'm starting to see why he calls select T-star a performance killer.
It's like clogging your arteries with unnecessary data.
Ooh.
You want to keep things flowing smoothly.
Yeah, for sure. So we're caching strategically, we're limiting our results.
Right.
But while we're on the topic of things to avoid, let's talk about what John Ryan calls the cardinal sin of Snowflake.
Ooh.
Row-by-row processing.
Okay.
He has this really great analogy to highlight just how bad this is.
I like a good analogy. Lay it on me.
Imagine trying to fill a swimming pool with a teaspoon.
Ooh, yeah.
That's what it's like using row-by-row processing in Snowflake.
Oh, my God.
So he shows the performance difference too, right?
Yeah, bulk inserting 1,000,000 rows takes like 5 seconds.
Wow.
But inserting just 10 rows in a loop, 11 seconds.
No way.
It's crazy. It's practically glacial in comparison.
Wow.
Snowflake is built for bulk operations. You need to be thinking in sets of data, not individual rows.
Okay, message received. No more row-by-row nonsense.
Good.
So we're caching strategically, we're limiting results, we're doing bulk operations.
Yeah.
What else can we do to keep our queries running lean and mean?
Well, one thing that John Ryan really emphasizes is that complexity is often the enemy of performance.
Yeah.
He talks about these sedimentary layers of views building up.
Interesting.
Where one view depends on another, and another, and another, and another, and it becomes this like tangled mess that the optimizer can't really handle efficiently.
It's like trying to untangle a giant ball of yarn.
Exactly. His suggestion is to break down these complex transformations into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay.
It's like creating a well-organized assembly line instead of just this one giant chaotic workshop.
I like that analogy.
And guess what? This can even allow for parallel processing, which means things get done even faster.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here. We're making things easier for the optimizer.
Yes.
And our future selves who have to maintain this code.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that can really trip you up.
Okay.
Spilling to storage.
Spilling to storage.
Remember that Snowflake has a hierarchy of storage, right? You've got memory, which is super fast.
Right.
Then you've got local storage, and finally remote storage, which is the slowest.
Sorry.
And we want to keep everything in memory as much as possible because that's where the magic happens.
Right.
But if your query is working with just a massive amount of data, or you have a complex operation that needs more space than your virtual warehouse's memory can handle, that's when spilling happens.
Okay.
Snowflake starts pushing data down to those slower storage tiers, and your query performance just tanks.
So it's like hitting that dreaded storage limit on your phone and suddenly everything slows to a crawl.
Perfect analogy. The article actually has this really handy query that you can use to monitor for spilling.
Oh, nice.
That way you can identify the culprit queries and start figuring out how to fix them. Often the solution is as simple as just moving the workload to a larger warehouse with more memory capacity.
More memory, fewer problems.
Right. Though, of course, there's always that balance between performance and cost.
Always.
Yeah.
So we've talked about caching. We've talked about avoiding select star.
Right.
We've talked about the horrors of row-by-row processing.
Uh-huh.
We've talked about breaking down complexity.
Yep.
And now we're talking about understanding spilling.
Yeah.
What else should we be thinking about?
Well, let's move on to a concept that sounds like it's straight out of gardening,
Okay.
but is actually one of the coolest things about Snowflake.
I'm intrigued.
Partition pruning.
Partition pruning. Okay.
Imagine you're looking for a specific book in a massive library.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to check every single shelf, right?
You need a good librarian.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's essentially what partition pruning does. Snowflake keeps track of metadata about each micropartition, like the minimum and maximum values for each column.
Okay.
So when you use a where clause in your query, Snowflake can use this metadata to instantly eliminate any micropartitions that definitely don't contain the data you're looking for.
So it's like magically skipping over entire sections of the library.
Exactly. So writing efficient where clauses is key here.
Okay, so even seemingly minor changes to your where clause can make a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. And John Ryan actually gives some great tips on how to do that. Like, avoid using wildcards at the beginning of columns, because that makes it harder for Snowflake to figure out which micropartitions to prune.
Interesting. So you've really got to understand how Snowflake thinks.
You do.
Yeah.
And speaking of understanding how Snowflake thinks, one of the most common mistakes people make is using functions in their where clause.
Okay.
This can totally throw off Snowflake's ability to do partition pruning effectively.
It gives an example in the article, right?
He does. There's one where, like, a tiny change to the where clause, just avoiding a function, made the query 10 times faster. It really highlights the importance of writing queries in a way that plays to Snowflake's strengths. It's not just about what your code does. It's about how Snowflake can interpret it for maximum efficiency.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I'm already seeing how much deeper this goes than just, like, knowing SQL.
Right. And this is where John Ryan's training course, Mastering Snowflake, can be so valuable.
Right.
It really dives into these nuances in a way that's practical and easy to understand.
Right. Mental note. Check out that course.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
there's still so much to unpack here in this article.
Yeah.
I'm particularly curious about this whole concept of tuning by zone that John Ryan keeps mentioning.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's saying you can't just have one optimize everything approach, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding that different parts of your data warehouse have different goals.
Okay.
He talks about these zones: raw, transformation, and delivery.
Uh-huh.
Each one has its own performance needs and its own tuning strategies.
So walk me through this.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm dealing with the raw zone where data is first landing.
Okay.
What are my optimization priorities there?
In the raw zone, it's all about maximizing data loading throughput.
Okay.
You want to get that data in as quickly and efficiently as possible. Think about things like file size and compression.
Right.
And using the right tools for loading, like SnowPipe.
So it's less about individual query speed and more about overall pipeline efficiency.
Exactly. Then you move into the transformation zone, where the focus shifts to maximizing transformation throughput.
Okay.
This is where you might be doing things like data cleaning, enrichment aggregation.
So this is where all that ETL magic happens.
Exactly. And this is where Snowflake's ability to execute tasks in parallel really shines.
Okay.
By using multi-cluster warehouses and running jobs in parallel sessions.
Right.
You can achieve massive throughput and keep those transformations humming along smoothly.
Okay, so raw zone is all about loading speed. Transformation zone is about parallel processing power.
Right.
What about the delivery zone?
Ah, the delivery zone.
That's where things get really interesting for me, because that's where our dashboards and reports are pulling from.
You got it. The delivery zone is all about those user-facing queries. Here, we need to minimize latency.
Right.
And ensure that those queries are lightning fast. Think about things like materialized views.
Okay.
Data clustering.
So different zones, different optimization strategies.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. And he gives specific recommendations for each zone, right?
Oh, yeah. He really gets into the nitty-gritty of adjusting warehouse sizes, scaling policies, and even using features like the search optimization service,
Wow.
which can be a game changer for those like needle in a haystack queries.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about caching, avoiding select star,
Right.
the evils of row-by-row processing,
Mm.
breaking down complexity, understanding, spilling, mastering the where clause,
Yep.
and even diving into the nuances of tuning by zone.
We did it.
I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, but in a good way.
Good overwhelm.
Like my brain is expanding with all these new possibilities.
That's the feeling we want you to have. And remember, John Ryan's training course really dives deep into all of this.
Yeah.
It's called Mastering Snowflake, and you can find it at analytics.today.
Right.
It could be just what you need to solidify all this new knowledge.
Definitely adding that to my to-do list.
Okay.
But before we wrap up, I have one more burning question.
Okay, get me.
Of all the tips we've discussed today, which one are you most excited to try out in your own work?
It's about understanding that different parts of your data warehouse have different goals. Like John Ryan talks about these zones, raw, transformation, and delivery. Each one has its own performance needs and its own tuning strategies.
So give me an example.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm dealing with the transformation zone where all that ETL magic is happening. What are my optimization priorities there?
Well, in the transformation zone, it's all about maximizing throughput. How quickly can you churn through those data transformations? Think about things like breaking down complex tasks into smaller steps that can be run in parallel.
So instead of one giant monolithic query that takes forever, we're talking about a series of smaller, more targeted queries that can be run concurrently.
Exactly. And that's where multi-cluster warehouses can really shine. It's like having a team of chefs working together in a kitchen instead of one chef trying to do everything at once.
That makes total sense. And since we're talking about chefs and kitchens, it reminds me of something else John Ryan mentions. Spilling to storage. It's like running out of counter space in your kitchen and having to start putting ingredients on the floor. Not ideal.
Right. Spilling happens when your query needs more memory than your virtual warehouse can handle. And when that happens, Snowflake has to start moving data to slower storage tiers, which can really slow things down.
So it's like suddenly realizing you need to grab something from the back of the pantry while you're in the middle of cooking.
Yeah.
It throws off your whole flow.
Exactly. The article actually gives a handy query that you can use to monitor for spilling, which I think is super useful because often you don't even realize it's happening until your query performance tanks.
Okay, so let's say I've identified a query that's spilling like crazy. What are my options?
Well, the easiest solution is often just to move the workload to a larger warehouse with more memory. It's like getting a bigger kitchen.
More memory, fewer problems. So, of course, we always have to keep an eye on those costs.
Always. It's all about finding the right balance between performance and budget. But speaking of finding the right balance, let's move on to something that seems a bit counterintuitive at first. Indexes. We're taught that indexes are good, right? They speed things up. But John Ryan argues that in Snowflake, they're often not your friend.
Hold on. Indexes are bad. That goes against everything I've ever learned about databases.
I know, right? It seems strange. But remember, Snowflake is a different beast than your traditional database. Indexes work great for single row lookups, but most data warehouse queries are all about processing millions of rows.
Okay, so I'm starting to see why John Ryan is so hesitant about indexes. But he does mention one exception, right? Something about hybrid tables.
Yes. Hybrid tables are a special type of table in Snowflake that are designed for both analytical and transactional workloads. They support primary key constraints, which are enforced using indexes, and they also allow for low latency lookups using unique indexes.
So if you have a use case where you need to perform frequent single row operations like in a transactional system, hybrid tables might be a good fit.
Exactly. It's like having a separate, smaller kitchen specifically for those quick on-demand tasks while your main kitchen is still optimized for those big batch operations.
I'm loving all these kitchen analogies. But
Yeah.
seriously, it's really helpful to think about it that way. Different tools for different jobs, and understanding those nuances is key to optimizing your entire Snowflake environment.
Absolutely. And speaking of different tools, John Ryan also touches on some really cool advanced performance features in Snowflake, like the search optimization service and materialized views.
Ooh, tell me more about those. I love getting a glimpse of the really powerful stuff.
Well, the search optimization service is like having a super-powered search engine specifically for your Snowflake data. It can quickly find those needles in a haystack, those few specific rows in a massive table with billions of rows.
That sounds incredibly useful for certain types of queries, especially when you're dealing with those massive data sets where traditional search methods would just crawl.
Exactly. Then there's materialized views, which are basically pre-computed views that store the results of a query. So instead of having to run the same complex query over and over again, you can just query the materialized view, which is like having a cheat sheet with the answers already calculated.
It's like having your mise en place ready to go so you can just grab what you need without having to chop and prep every single time.
Perfect analogy. And of course, we can't forget about data clustering, which we touched on earlier.
Right. Data clustering is all about physically organizing your data in a way that makes it easier for Snowflake to find what it needs. It's like having a well-organized pantry where you can quickly find the ingredient you're looking for.
And remember, John Ryan suggests that data clustering is especially useful in the delivery zone where those user-facing queries need to be as snappy as possible.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've gone from the basics of caching and select star to the complexities of spilling indexes and tuning by zone. And we even got a sneak peek at some of the more advanced performance features Snowflake has to offer. My head is spinning.
It's a lot to take in, but I think the key takeaway here is that Snowflake optimization is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of learning, experimenting, and fine-tuning your approach based on your specific needs and workloads.
And it's a journey that requires a deep understanding of how Snowflake works under the hood, which is where John Ryan's Mastering Snowflake training course can be so valuable. It's like having a personal guide to navigate all the twists and turns of Snowflake optimization.
Absolutely. And with that in mind, I have a question for you and for our listeners. Of all the techniques and strategies we've talked about, which one are you most excited about to try out in your own work? I'm really interested in that whole like tuning by zone concept. It just makes so much sense.
Yeah, no, totally. It makes you realize that like every part of your Snowflake instance is not the same.
Right.
And you can get so much more performance if you kind of tailor your approach.
Absolutely. And for me, I'm excited to dig into those advanced features like the materialized views
Oh, yeah.
and the search optimization service.
Ooh, yeah, those are cool.
There's so much potential there to really supercharge query performance.
Well, I think that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating, right? There's always something new to learn and explore with Snowflake.
Absolutely.
It's not just about memorizing a set of rules. It's about understanding like how it works under the hood
Yeah.
and using that knowledge to write smarter, faster, more cost-effective queries.
Couldn't have fit it better myself. And John Ryan's course is an amazing resource for all that.
It is. If you're serious about like taking your Snowflake skills to the next level,
Yeah.
you can find it over at analytics.today.
It's called Mastering Snowflake. It's awesome.
Yeah, you'll be a Snowflake ninja in no time.
Totally.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Snowflake query optimization.
Awesome. It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you learned something new and you're feeling inspired to supercharge your own Snowflake queries.
And remember, the journey to optimization never truly ends. There's always more to learn, more to test, and more to improve.
So keep experimenting, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Snowflake.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy optimizing.